Hello, everybody. We are on our second lecture for archaeology. This is the second part of chapter 6. So let's get into it. All right, announcements. Please make sure to read and watch that material. Please make sure to complete this week's quiz and reflection. And just some quick tips for the reflection. Please only use information from this class and make sure it is 600 words. All right. Like always, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email and I'll make sure to answer you. All right. So think about 5,000 years in the future. What is something that archaeologists would find from 2020? What are some conclusions they would make about what they found, right? So we're learning a lot about archaeology and we're learning about how people study the past, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to imagine that there are some alien archaeologists and the whole, Earth got like messed up by some natural disaster, right? And we're buried under a bunch of stuff. So I use the year 2020 in particular, right? So like, what would we see from that time, and what wouldn't we see, and why, right? Okay. All right. So let's talk about subsistence strategies. So how do we? First of all, let's talk about what a subsistence strategy is. Subsistence strategies represent different ways that varying societies meet basic survival needs, right? Basic survival needs is basically, food, water, shelter. Yeah, shelter. These are subsistence strategies. So different strategies in which societies use to survive. Okay. Archaeologists divide societies into foragers and food producers. Foragers are food collectors who gather, fish, or hunt, and food producers depend on domesticated plants or animals or both. Okay, so foragers are people who essentially go out for food. When I say out, I mean like hunting and gathering. And food producers are, as they sound, they produce food, right? Food producers include pastoralists who herd animals and also farmers who practice intensive or extensive agriculture. Now, pastoralist is a pretty straightforward thing. They herd animals, right? So people who they have a group of animals and they make them move. They take care of them, stuff, so on and so forth. But for farmers, intensive or extensive agriculture, what does that refer to? Intensive is the knowledge of taking care of them, right? And extensive mean that it extends beyond just a few things. Now, what is this basically saying? Intensive and extensive. Intensive is like they know when to plant seeds. They know what type of soil is good. Yeah. Okay. And extensive is like it's not just feeding a person; it's feeding like a number of people. And the reason why this is put in there is because I remember for a science class when I was young, we put like an avocado seed into some soil and we watched it grow. Does that make you a farmer? No, right? You need to have knowledge of the process and or serving a larger group of people. Okay, so that's what makes intensive and extensive agriculture. Okay, now I have this little question on the bottom because of the word forage. I've heard a lot this word forage a lot in like restaurants and stuff. Like these are forage mushrooms or whatever. What makes a group of people foragers or food producers is the larger percentage of their diet, right? So, for example, let's say in our society, let's say I go hunt for a pig and I eat the pig. Does that make me a forager? No, because I'm still coming home and eating Tyson chicken most of the time, right? And vice versa is true, right? So if they grow a few things at home, but they're mostly hunting things outside, what are they, right? If they're mostly eating things that they hunt, then they're foragers. Okay, so that's what I want to clarify. Okay, because there are, especially early on in our history, there were a lot of people who were food producing, but they weren't as adequate at it, so they still had to forage, and so they were still foragers in that sense, right? So it's a mixture of both. All right. So subsistence strategies. Yeah, food collectors and food producers. Food collectors are small scale foragers, and complex foragers. Uh, they're exactly as they sound. Um, small scale foragers are foragers that are just like, hey, there's a blueberry here, let's get it. Hey, there's something here, let's get that, right? And then complex foragers are a little more intelligent with what they're doing. And they're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't get this right now, they're not ripe, or we shouldn't get this right now because it needs time to grow, whatever. Okay. Food producers are herders and farmers. We went over extensive and intensive agriculture already, right? Extensive is that it feeds, or could feed more than a few people, a couple people, And then intensive is that, you know, knowledge of it. Okay. No, sorry, knowledge of farming. Okay. Mechanized industrial agriculture is what we are today, where they can basically like kill and skin and everything, like process like 50 chickens in like a minute or whatever, right? That's what we're in today. Or like we can collect like, you know, 2 acres of rice in like 30 minutes or something. That's mechanized industrial agriculture. That's what we are living here, mostly. Okay. All right, so let's talk about social organization. Society is sometimes categorized into bands, tribes, chiefs, and states. These represent points on a continuum. Okay. Now, it's a little bit easier in person, but basically, if we were in person, we would have like, you know, 30 people in our classroom. So we would be a band society. Band societies are the common social organization among foragers. So this is important. We're foragers at this point. We are going out for food. We consist usually of no more than 50 people, provide roughly equal access to material social valuables, and divide labor on the basis of age and sex. Yeah? Okay. Pretty straightforward. So what's interesting about this though is that we provide equal access to material social valuables. So there's 30 of us. If we catch 30 fish, for example, each person gets a fish. Whether or not they went fishing, whether or not they did anything, every person gets a fish. Okay. And at this point, we divide labor on how old you are and whether you're a male or female. Okay. So tribal societies. Tribal societies now we're getting bigger, right? Let's say we're 3 times. Let's say we're 100 people. Okay. We at tribal societies, we're composed of farmers or herders, meaning that again we're producing our own food. So this consists usually of more people than seen in a band. Provide roughly equal access to material social valuables. So we're still, if we have 100 people and we catch 100 fish, everyone's still getting a fish. We may divide labor on the basis of disodalities that group people based on sex, age, economic role, or personal interest, and can have a leader with greater prestige, but not usually greater power or wealth. So there's 3 big differences here, right? The first thing is we are making our own food. The second thing is when we divide labor, we are basing it not just on sex and age. We're dividing other things as well, right? Personal interest, economic role. Like, hey, you know, this person really likes to fish. Maybe we'll let them fish more. Okay. And finally, it can have a greater leader with greater prestige, but not usually greater power or wealth. And this is very different, right? Because in tribal societies, essentially, what this basically means is that the head of the tribal society, they have more respect, but not necessarily more power, which is a very interesting dynamic. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, now moving on, we're getting really, really big now. We're a chiefdom society. The chiefdom society, let's say we're like 1,000 people big. Okay, usually consists more people than seen in a tribe. Roughly provide unequal access to material social valuables. So now things are starting to get chopped up a little bit. Okay, and we'll talk about the next one to kind of, or it'll play into the next one. So let's say, you know, Ruby in our group did all the fishing. You know, Ruby gets more fish, or as you can see at the bottom of this, right? It has, or at the next thing, we have a leader who has more power. Let's say Devin is the leader of this group. Devin's going to get 10 fish no matter what. But you know what? Sally didn't do anything, so Sally's getting no fish, right? So now we're starting to divide the wealth and social valuables differently amongst our society. Okay. We have a leader or chief who, along with his or her relatives, have privileged access to power, wealth, prestige. So now we're talking about a leader that we're more familiar with, a leader that has more priority to power, wealth, and prestige. Okay. And like I said, I know I gave a very basic example, right? Where like if we catch, let's say we have 1,000 people, we catch 1,000 fish, the king or the queen and their family get, you know, like 100 fish off the bat, right? Something like that. Okay. Show a greater degree of craft production. So this is very straightforward. Student societies, because they're more, you know, further along their development, they have more maybe time to devote to certain things. They have better craft, right? What does better craft look like? It's like a sharper knife, a more rounded pan, a better living area, more technology for fishing. That's what better craft production is, right? And finally, may develop in the states. Now, this is an interesting point, right? May develop in the states, because if you notice these past two, they don't have, like, band society doesn't have, it's going to turn into tribe society, and tribe society doesn't have, it's going to turn into a chief society. Why does chief society say it's going to turn into a state? The answer is quite easy. It's just because people die really easily, right? So think about a band society, you don't even have like a real setup, and because you're foraging all the time, you're most likely moving around all the time. Imagine if one of you gets sick. Imagine if you're going to go hunt something and it's not there. Or imagine if you hunt something or gather something and it's, unfortunately poisonous or it gets you guys sick, you're going to die, right? And tribal societies are kind of similar, right? Yeah, you're creating your own food at this point, but it still makes it very difficult because, again, there's only so many things you can do. Especially with band and tribal societies, they usually have to have what I call all hands on deck, right? So even though, yes, you might be better at fishing, for example, you still need to do all this other stuff because there's so much to do in your group. Does that make sense? However, once you're hitting the chieftain society, you have enough people to sustain other people, and then you have better craft production, and then you have and to reach to be completely honest with you, to reach like a chieftain society, to reach like 1,000 people or whatever, means that your society has already learned how to deal with the things that, for example, that would kill tribal and band societies. Okay. Now let's move on to the last one, states. Okay, so I want you to kind of peel away your understanding of what a state is and what a tribe is for this class, because a little bit different, right? State in this case, this definition is what a state is. It doesn't mean like a state in America, right? And same with tribe. Just because the word tribe is being used here doesn't mean it means only like Native American tribes. It can mean a lot of different things depending on the definition. Okay. So anyway, states. States consist of a stratified society with unequal access to material or social valuables, have a defined territory and a centralized government, are led by an elite with the power to tax and monopoly using force, may develop into empires by conquering other states. Okay, so states consist of stratified society. So stratified, what does stratified mean? Stratified means that there's more categories involved in that society, right? So, if you play like those medieval video games, right, there's like the king, the queen, there's nobility, there's knights, there's merchants, there's peasants, there's yeah, right, that's both of them. Okay, so those are the different categories, right? And because there are different categories, there's unequal access to material social valuables. So for example, would someone from the knight class have the same ability to get, I don't know, riches as like the king and queen? Of course not. Okay. States also have a defined territory and a centralized government. I don't need to explain that. This is interesting. Are led by an elite with the power to tax and monopoly using force, right? So I'm sure, again, if you guys have played this video games or watched movies or whatever, the king can call the knights to fight for the country or to fight for this and that or to arrest somebody, right? But a normal common person cannot call the knights to do anything to the king, right? And that's what they're talking about, is a power on you, or sorry, a monopoly on using force, meaning that the king, whether it's direct or indirect, has the power to use that force while other people do not. And finally, the power to tax, right? That's also very straightforward. The king can raise taxes on, let's say, the peasants, but the peasants can't raise taxes on the king. Yeah. And finally, may develop an empire by conquering other states. That's not that important. Okay. So at this point, we're talking about quite a bit of differences from our first group. Okay. And states, states are still, even though they are, they can survive through the things that all these other three have not survived through. They still might have their own issues. Okay. So, digital heritage. Digital heritage refers to digital information about the past available on the internet. Digital information includes digitized documents, digital photos, artifact images, video and sound recordings, 3D artifact and site reconstructions. Basically, what this is talking about is that the benefits of computers and like the internet and stuff for archaeology is like invaluable. It's very important. That's it. Okay. All right. Yeah. Great. Okay. So, let's talk a little about ethics, right? So even though this all sounds fine and dandy, archaeologists have not been great people in the past. Archaeologists recognize now that the past can have meaning to people in today. Descendant communities can help develop an understanding, deepen an understanding of the past, and conflicts that develop over ownership of the past, especially over excavation of Native American burials. So I'm gonna break this down and just tell you that archaeologists were super, super disrespectful to Native Americans in the past. And it's so bad that they created NAGPRA, right? A whole legal thing to protect Native Americans because it was so bad. So Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Congress passed NAGPRA in 1990 to protect Native American graves on federal or tribal land. Federal agencies or federally funded museums must also inventory Native American human remains and cultural objects collected in the past years. Items may be repatriated or returned to Native American groups. So basically, what happened was, archaeologists just go into Native American land, just be like, "Yo, like I want to do this," and then the Native Americans be like, "Nah, I don't want you to do this," and they just do it anyway, right? So there was no protection for Native Americans at all. And then they would they would dig up, their great great grandmother, do some research, and just leave it, and just be super disrespectful and super violating their privacy in a lot of ways, and violating their rights. So they had to create this act to protect them. Okay. Sorry. And then going over what specifically it is basically if Native Americans see stuff in a museum that is theirs, it needs to be returned to the Native American tribe. If they want it to be returned, because a lot of that stuff is not legally obtained. And this third one right here is very important. Federal agencies or federally funded museums, which is basically all of them, must also inventory Native American human remains and cultural objects collected in past years. Even though this sounds obvious, inventory. Why is inventory so important? It's because you need to have clear records of where you got it from. You can't just be like, oh, I don't know where I got this from. This stolen, Native American basket just came and just landed in front of my museum. That doesn't work that way anymore, right? Now you need to have records, and if you don't have records, you get penalized. So you need to know who sold to you and make sure it's obtained legally, essentially. All right, this in the past week's passes anyway. So I don't love this example with the textbook, but it talks about Taliban extremists destroying monuments, specifically the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan. The reason why it's significant is because there was a big Buddhist population in Afghanistan in the past. However, there's no other remnants of that community except for now the Buddhas, right? That exist over there, and the Taliban destroyed it for political reasons. The reason why I don't love this example is because we have to realize that the past and our value of the past is our own, it's our problem, essentially. It's not their problem, right? You can't blame someone for not caring about certain things. It's their own society and it's their own values. To tell people that they have to care about this, it's a little bit not cool, in my opinion, right? I wouldn't like my friend, if I was gonna throw away my couch, and my friend was like, "Oh, don't throw away the couch. There's so much history there." I'm like, okay, well, what am I gonna do with it? I want a new couch, or I want to do this and that. I have to store it, right? So there's a lot of kind of that involved with with this stuff, and also the kind of this painting of people who blow up archaeological artifacts as super evil and stuff. That's also not true, because to the Taliban, what the Taliban is trying to promote is more important than the Buddhas. So you can't tell people that it is or is not important. Okay. On top of that, there's also other things that we talked about, similar to preservation, where land development destroys a lot of the past, right? Construction, mechanized agriculture, like I said, especially mechanized agriculture. Those trucks that go through the ground. Guarantee you, if there's anything in the past that's in the ground, if once that bad boy mixes them up, they're not going to be there anymore. And of course, looting in the market for stolen antiquities. When people, sometimes when you discover things that has a bunch of nice jewels and stuff, it's worth a lot of money. And unfortunately, private collectors, they have ex-CIA members, ready to steal this stuff for them. And, all you can hire is school security to protect it. And who do you think is going to get the stuff? Obviously the CIA guy, right? So this is also a big problem. We do not need to do this. All right, so let's talk about gender archaeology as well. Gender archaeology recognizes that traditional archaeologists often ignore the presence of women in the past. Collaborative archaeology projects seek to study the past by working with descendant communities. Archaeology as a tool of civic engagement is an approach that seeks to use an understanding of the past to address modern social issues. Okay. Let me just give you a thing and an example. So, feminist archaeology rejected biological determinism of sex roles, arguing that cultural and historical factors are responsible for how a society allocated tasks, and that this allocation could change over time. The goal is to develop a view of the past that replaces focus on remains with focus on people as active social agents. Okay, so I'm gonna go over this in a second. Let me give you the example. So Jiro showed how traditional archaeological discussion of the stone tool technologies focused on highly formalized, elaborately retouched, standardized core tools. Their focus, together with the assumption that such tools were made by men to hunt with, turns men and their activities into the driving force of cultural evolution. It simultaneously downplays or ignores the far more numerous flake tools that were probably made and used by women in such tasks as processing food or working wood and leather, exposing its false supposition that women were not strong or smart enough to produce them. So, look, so let me break this down, this example for you. So basically, this guy is really obsessed with these stone tool technologies that men use to hunt, right? And he emphasized those stone tool technologies a lot. But indirectly, what that did was that basically puts men as the driving force of change in these old societies. But what the author is saying is that, yes, that happened, but also women were responsible for a lot of other types of technologies that contributed to their development as well, such as making the flake tools and processing food or working wood and leather. And especially you look back then, women were responsible for more of the food caloric intake because men were out trying to hunt stuff. I don't know if you've gone hunting, but it ain't easy, right? And so if you talk about pure caloric intake, like women were more beneficial in that way. So again, what I'm trying to say though here is that, what the feminist archaeology is not trying to say that, oh, women are more important than men, but feminist archaeology is trying to review the literature and just be like, yo, like women actually played an important role during this time too, but it never gets talked about, right? So if you look at this analysis right here, you're not changing the facts, you're changing the analysis of the facts, and that's what's important, right? You also have to keep in mind that I think we can all agree that people 40 years ago were more sexist than they are today, let's say, right? And that sexism comes into your research. I don't care how objective you think you are, you're not. And so it's always good to have people review it and see if there's anything missing based off of the biases that might have existed back then. Okay. So let's talk about this real quick. Oh, why does it say 2018? Let's fix that real quick. 2020. Sorry, let me pull it back up. So full circle, what is something they would find from 2020, right? They'd find masks, they find a bunch of tests, they find I don't know, what's something that's like COVID specific. Yeah, they find masks, find a bunch of tests. Maybe they find some warning posters, whatever, right? But would they, so like based off of what they found though, would it give you an accurate depiction of what actually happened during that time, right? So like for example, like the MTA kind of like was like known on MTA, there was known in Times Square, there was that the skies are blue because of the lack of pollution. Would all that be mentioned through the things that they found? Of course not, right? Would they talk about the politics that went into masking and anti-masking and all this other stuff? No, they wouldn't, because they wouldn't be able to find anything about it, right? And so what I'm trying to illustrate through this scenario is that when you think about doing analysis on artifacts or on ecofacts or on the archaeological record in general, you really need to ask yourself, how accurate is the stuff that I'm looking at, right? I mean, have you ever thought, like, let's say, again, with same scenario as this one in the example, what would they think an iPhone is? Because at that point, they're not going to be able to turn it on. They're going to open it and there's a bunch of computer chips. But are they going to know that we use it for talking? Are they going to know how big of an influence it is with social media? Are they going to know that, I don't know, like that even though they're all the same phone, they have different carriers, right? These are all things that they probably wouldn't know, and it's important information for understanding our time. Okay, so that's kind of like the challenge. So if you look at a lot of the archaeological work, a lot of it seems like it's like new, quote unquote, new research, but really what happens is that they find something new and it changes the analysis from the past, and that's important to understand, because it's not like they're finding new things all the time. It's not that easy to find new things. Okay. All right. That's pretty much it. Please be sure to read and watch our material. Please make sure to do this week's quiz and reflection. Again, only use information from the class. Just go through the PowerPoints and go through, my lectures, and you're good to go. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kbcc.cuny.edu.